Hello, I'm Bootleg Alan Moore, and today I'm going to tell you about my top 10 role-playing games of all time, in no particular order and subject to violent change at any point for any reason. People have been asking me to do more positive videos rather than the reviews and so on that I do, but I think some of that, all of that, a great deal of it comes down to the fact that I'm English and that we tend to understate things, and reviews tend to be criticism, letting people know what's good and what's bad. So I think it's just the fact that I'm not hype about everything that seems to confuse people. But anyway, without any further ado, in no particular order, Mage The Ascension, one of the best games ever made, I think. An elegant system that allows you to play a magician from any magical tradition whatsoever, and yet fits it all in under the same kind of elegant system, by viewing all magic as different facets of will working, of defying reality, of subverting the paradigm and substituting your own. There's nothing that has ever been quite as successful in conveying a credible, plausible magic system that also manages to explain the entire rest of the world of darkness. Mage is just perfect, really, as a system goes, particularly for magic, and that's what you want from a game centered around magicians, I suppose. The magic system is probably quite important, and nothing else has ever really reached the heights that we see within Mage The Ascension. A lot of people have issues with it because it's so open and not particularly set, but once you get the knack of it, nothing else is as good. Cyberpunk 2020. Cyberpunk is one of those seminal games. Without Cyberpunk, you could not have had Vampire. You could not have had that sort of dark renaissance of gaming in the 90s. Cyberpunk 2013 had a lot of promise. I bought my copy in a Games Workshop store, which shows you how far back that's going, because they used to sell things that weren't Warhammer. But it was Cyberpunk 2020 that brought it all together, and it's the version with the Spanish art in it that really kind of elevated the game form. But Cyberpunk placed a great deal of emphasis on style. It had a lot of suggestions for kind of set dressing your gaming area, using music, lighting, even costume and so on to elevate the form of role-playing. So Cyberpunk is very important in the development of gaming, and also it's just a damn good game, and it's a game that reflected the fiction very well. If you want a definitive Cyberpunk role-playing game, then Cyberpunk 2020 is it. For a lot of genres or sub-genres, we haven't had games that really fulfill it. Like there are no really good, straightforward, difference engine style steampunk games, and that's a shame. But Cyberpunk is Cyberpunk. Dragon Warriors was a hugely influential game upon me. It was released originally in paperback format, similar to the choose your own adventure type books, fighting fantasy and so on. So it was cheap, it was accessible, it was deeply rooted in British folklore, tradition, mythology, Arthurian legend and so on. So it really tied into a lot of that uniquely British character of role-playing in this country, and it's a simple, accessible system. It used comic strips to convey the rules. Just a wonderful introductory package role-playing game for a lot of people that still today never really gets its due, and that's unfortunate. Looking forward to the advanced version by the original authors soon. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay definitely has to have a mention. Woothrup had a gritty, nasty system. It's probably the original grimdark role-playing game that actually set out to be a grimdark role-playing game. Early Dungeons and Dragons was a grind and was grim and dark, less deliberately, more as a consequence of the rules as written. Warhammer set out to be deadly and nasty and horrible. Chaos, Skaven, all of that. In my opinion, the Hogshead edition is the definitive version of it, even though they were hemmed in by a lot of rules from Games Workshop, and they kind of kept the home fires burning until the game could emerge once more and become bigger than Games Workshop were allowing while Hogshead was doing it. The career system is very good. I know people have their objections to it, like once you become an adventurer, why are you continuing in these careers? But as a way of channeling your character or creating a new character, certainly that's wonderful. You know, and starting out as a gong farmer or a rat catcher or whatever, and working your way up, if you survive, into being someone significant. Wonderful stuff. Fangshuy is a wonderful game. Fangshuy is most noteworthy for its stunt mechanic, which I reference very often during reviews and so on. It's something so simple, but it's an idea that replicates the genre of Hong Kong action movies, over the top, sort of John Woo, Big Trouble in Little China, all of that kind of stuff, because you don't take a penalty when you do something absurd and over the top and ridiculous. You get a bonus. So it encourages the players to put a great deal of thought into the moves and actions and so on that their characters are doing, and it does it all without complicated mechanics. Now, the first edition is the definitive edition of Fangshuy for me. The later edition loses something special that Fangshuy had, and the official background is not that interesting, but using the system to replicate those kind of films, choice. Call of Cthulhu has to be in this list. It's really the first game that popularized and made people aware that you could model mental struggles and issues in an effective way through its sanity mechanic. It's been superseded by other ideas and ways of doing it since, and it's been a bit of a casualty of the political correctness or whatever you want to call it that has inveigled its way into the hobby. But even so, Call of Cthulhu remains a largely unchanged standard, and that's one of the reasons it is so successful globally. The basic roleplay system is simulationist but accessible. It's a percentile based system. It's deadly in a way that makes sense somewhat and conforms to how we experience reality. So the underlying system, basic role-playing, is effective and worth a mention as well. Star Wars D6. There have been many Star Wars systems since, but Star Wars D6 is the definitive Star Wars game. I think second to D&D, certainly during the 80s, this was a lot of people's gateway into the hobby. Very simple, roll a bunch of D6s, character creation's a breeze because you have templates that you can customize. It's still a good system for you to use. There are lots of options for it. It's an open system now, but Star Wars was familiar to everybody in the same kind of way that fantasy tropes were familiar to everybody. it was hugely appealing to enter the Star Wars universe. And at the time, we had this whole interesting mess of an expanded universe. So your stories felt like they could fit in to the broader Star Wars universe, galaxy, whatever. And you could also use your games to fill in the gaps and explore things that you were interested in. Indeed, so well regarded and loved were the Star Wars D6 sourcebooks and so on, that there was an interplay between the games and the fiction and the ongoing Star Wars universe, where Star Wars D6 books were on the shelves for reference for people who were working on the EU and everything. So yeah, Star Wars, it's a shame none of the other Star Wars games have ever been quite as accessible or popular, and it's a shame that Star Wars hasn't been as accessible or popular since either. Over the Edge, first edition. This is a very effective form of story game, of a game where there is a heavy narrative focus, where characters are simple, where the rules system kind of melts away into the background in a way that effectively allows you to inhabit your character. The setting is surreal and weird, tapping into the energy that Vampire the Masquerade used to give, the aspiration that role-playing games could be art, could be something elevated, weird, interesting, a genuinely worthwhile form. The second edition, the newer edition's a lot less effective and loses its way, but the system that underlies the first edition is available under a public license called Warp, and it's well worth a look. Heavy Gear. If you want a slightly harder science fiction system involving mecha, if you want to reproduce the sense of Armored Trooper Votoms, for example, then Heavy Gear is where you need to go, where you need to look. I don't really know exactly what happened to DreamPod 9. I know some of it was to do with printing and shipping costs to and from Canada and all kinds of things. But for a while there, they were kind of riding high. They had Heavy Gear, Jovian Chronicles, Gear Krieg. They had several lines of miniatures. There were computer games being made. There was a kids' TV series. Then suddenly they just seemed to kind of disappear. They've come back with a new edition, which I've backed. I don't know how good it really looks. We'll see once I get it. But the underlying system, the silhouette system that was available throughout their games, really suited their mecha games because it is easily scalable. So it's a breeze in a way in which it is normally clunky in a lot of games to have mecha or vehicles of different sizes and capabilities going up against each other. But Heavy Gear was designed from the ground up to be both a role-playing game and a skirmish game at the same time, using the same rules, and it just worked. Remains to be seen if the new edition is. Vampire the Masquerade has to get a mention here. It's the second one for White Wolf. The Vampire, while it became bloated and bogged down and didn't stick the landing, it's still a tremendously effective RPG if you go back and read the first edition, and contextually it was quite revolutionary, not necessarily in the system but in the approach, in the same sort of way that Cyberpunk elevated the form and fulfilled the genre and everything. So Vampire did for that kind of fiction, and again gave us this sense that what we were doing could be art, right? Storyteller perhaps was a misstep, an over focus on the idea of a guided narrative, but otherwise fairly elegant, easy system, easy to get into. Here's a sheet, fill in some dots. Okay, let's play. You know, it was one of those easy to pick up games, and it did bring a hell of a lot of sexy goth chicks into the hobby, for which we will all be eternally grateful. And honourable mention, of course, D&D, for kicking the whole thing off from the start. I didn't start with D&D, which is why it's not part of the main list. It doesn't mean as much to me as it does to a lot of other people, but you've got to tip the hat, which ironically I'm not wearing in this video, to Dungeons and Dragons for kicking off the entire hobby. So kudos for that, at least. Zang.
In his house in R'lyeh, great Kcthulu lies dreaming, and when he awakens, he shall have the morning wood of aeons. Call of Kcthulu is a deeply pornographic card game. Enjoy your tentacles.
Get some plastic surgery against this society. Entropy, apathy, morality, totality. Makeup of your final days. Survival of the fittest haze. Might is right on, fight on, praise. Smoke and mirrors, twisted maze. Are you strong